Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Mob Museum. Welcome to the Courtroom Conversation, In Depth with Oscar Goodman. My name is Jeff Schumacher. I'm the Vice President of Exhibits and Programs here at the museum. It's great to see a full courtroom for what promises to be an entertaining and educational evening. That always is true with Oscar. I mean, we don't have to have any notes at all, right? We could just...
I can't read. Why do I... Not going to start at this stage of the proceedings.
The focus of our conversation tonight will be on Oscar's legal career, not so much his time as mayor, although we could always touch on that during the Q&A with the audience later if you like. So how are you doing tonight, Oscar?
I can't be better. I'm a happy camper, very, very healthy. My wife is very, very healthy, and she's winding down her, and this bothers me a little bit, her 13th year as the mayor. I was only the mayor for 12 years, and then to spite me, the legislature gave her an extra year, and she said I finally beat him and held a press conference to that effect. And I have to hear it every morning after she's through clapping for me and getting me started and, to start the day. Come on, folks, loosen up. Jesus, like it's going. This is fun. This is no funeral. See, that's the reason I like this. And I'm starting. I shouldn't be starting, but I like this because the thing I never understand is when they have celebrations of life when the person's dead.
Yeah, right.
And
right.
This is how I celebrate my life, talking about the old days, the stories, and seeing the people smile and having a good time. And I love when we open it up for questions because I get some great questions, and there's no question that I'm afraid to answer. And if you want to try to stump me, that's going to be your problem, not my problem. And I look forward to this, and Jeff's a great moderator, and I never let him get a word in edgewise, but tonight I'm going to give him a chance.
Very good. Well, thank you. You grew up in Philadelphia.
Right.
And went to law school in the area as well. What kind of law did you think you were going to practice when you were in law school?
Oh, I had no idea. My dad was an assistant district attorney in Philadelphia, and my mom was an artist back there. And I didn't know what I was going to do. It was either going into the service or going to law school. And I figured I wouldn't get shot in law school anyhow. And went to law school, and right off the bat, I really disliked it because even though Penn was a great Ivy League school, it was the days that the students were interested in making a lot of money. Money was never a big object as far as I was concerned. And they all wanted to go into white shoe law firms, and I was interested in civil rights, civil liberties, and the like. And it was the day of the Warren Court when Mapp versus Ohio and Miranda were decided. And I was fascinated with that aspect of the law. And after a while, am I talking too much?
No, you're good.
Okay. I had just gotten married after my first year, and my wife was supporting us, and I felt terrible that I wasn't contributing. And I said to myself, I have to get a job. And I didn't like law school. I wasn't working, so I went down to the DA's office in Philadelphia and went into the DA, and his name was Jim Crumlish. I didn't know him. I knocked on his door, and I said, Mr. Crumlish, I like a job as a clerk here. And he says, where do you go to school? I said, Penn Law. He said, oh, you don't want to do that. That's an Ivy League law school, and you have to study all the time. I said, I hate it. I hate it. I said, I hate the people in my class. I hate the professors. I hate the subject. I hate it, and I'm going to drop out of law school unless I can get a job. So he sent me down the hall. He said, talk to Arlen Specter. I bet half the people in the room don't even remember who Arlen Specter was, but he was a very prominent United States senator. But at that time, he was the chief in charge of the appeals division with the DA's office in Philadelphia, and he had just come off a conviction of the first conviction of a Teamster official. Mm-hmm. And he said, you don't want to work for me. I don't need anybody just to come in and come out. If you work for me, you have to work a 40-hour week, and I'll pay you $1 an hour. And if you miss one day, you're through. And I said, that's just what I'm looking for. And I worked for Arlen. He was a great mentor, had wonderful work habits. And it was that background that I went through the rest of law school, barely getting through by the skin of my teeth, but really enjoying myself because I had that experience with real lawyers, and it was an awful lot of fun.
So growing up in a working class neighborhood in Philadelphia, did you have a sense of organized crime's presence in the community?
Absolutely.
I know that you paid attention to the Kefauver hearings a little bit.
A little bit, but I think that was just what the entire country did at that time. It was a fascinating time with the hearings, and I think anyone who had a TV, and we did not have a TV, they had these little, I don't know whether they even make them anywhere, a little Philco TV it was called, and it had a little round cover, and it was a magnifying glass, and that's what the TV was, and our neighbor had one, and he said, if you want to come down and watch TV, come down, and I would watch the hearings, and I found them to be fascinating, and I enjoyed those, but that didn't affect whether I was going to be a criminal lawyer or not. I didn't know I was going to be a criminal lawyer. It all happened by accident.
How did Las Vegas come into the picture for you?
Well, a wealthy widow was killed back in Philadelphia when I was working for Arlen, and the fellows who killed her took $300,000 from under her mattress, and they brought it out to Las Vegas to launder in the old traditional sense of laundering, where they would play the money at the crap tables to exchange it for other denominations of bills. And they were arrested, and Harry Claiborne, who was the premier criminal defense lawyer in Las Vegas, got them released on a writ of habeas corpus, and they went to Omaha and were rearrested there and brought back to Philly for trial. And Arlen said, work up the police officers who engaged in a search and seizure out here for their testimony. We're having a motion to suppress. So we met, and it was a cold, dreary, my wife said it was February. I know it was November. A cold, dreary November night, and it was an old stone building, and the wind just went right through it. And at the end of 4 hours, they said, what are you doing here? I said, where else is there? They said, Las Vegas. I said, people really live there? They don't live in the hotels? They said, no, Las Vegas is a great place. So I went home that night, and I said to my wife, I said, sweetheart, how would you like to go to the land of milk and honey? And she said, I love you, Oscar, but I'm not moving to Israel.
Now, in September, I believe this is right, September of 1964, you in fact did move to Las Vegas. That's 60 years
You're
ago.
absolutely wrong. These questions are absolutely wrong. This is rigged, and
60 years.
So it was everybody remembers the day that they got here. I got here August the 28th of 1964.
Okay.
What's
Off
wrong
by
with you,
2
Jeff?
days.
You always remember when you come over that hill and see those twinkling lights out in the desert, and no building was taller than 2 stories high. And my wife said, as a tumbleweed ran in front of our car, she said, where have you brought me? My father was right. I shouldn't have married you.
What was Las Vegas like at that time?
It was a nice town. It was a nice cowboy town where everybody was friendly. We arrived here with $87 in our collective pockets. We didn't know a soul. And basically, we made a life for ourselves. The only thing Carolyn asked me was to move into a nice apartment, because when I was going to law school and we were married, we lived in a very bad section. Penn was in a horrible section of Philadelphia at the time, and in the summertime, I actually had to meet her at the bus stop because shootings were taking place every night. And when we came out here, there was a very nice apartment at 713 East Sahara. As a matter of fact, apartment number 613, it was a 2-story apartment, it's still there, I believe. And she said, this is just what we needed. It's so nice, and we have nice neighbors. And there was a beautiful young lady who was walking her little poodle across the street every day, and Carolyn pointed out, she said, she must be a showgirl. And I asked a lady one day, what show are you in? She says, I'm a hooker. So we moved from the fire into the firing pan, I think. Am I responding to these questions, or am I making all these stories up?
You're doing great.
Okay.
So one of your first cases that really got you started on the road to becoming a criminal defense attorney happened right here in this building, in this room.
It happened in this
That
room.
was in 1967. Tell us about Mel Horowitz's stepbrother and all of that.
This was where I tried my first federal case. I got, we used to go out to the Hacienda, which is where the Mandalay Bay is now, or right in that area. My dad was, after he got over the fact that I really did move to Las Vegas and wasn't living in Phoenix as he had told all of his friends, he would send us $25 a month. It was a great gift on the proviso that it would have to be used for entertainment. Couldn't be used for rent, couldn't be used for anything of a necessary basis, just for fun. And we went to the Hacienda. They had a room called that was a fireside room, and Carolyn was the first counter I ever knew. She used to play. She used
Card counter, right?
Card counter. She was a card counter. That's not what she did for a living, but I mean, when she was growing up, there was a game called Concentration. And you took 52 cards and you turned them over, and then you had to match them up. And she used to play that with her sister and her parents, and that's the way her mind worked. And when she would sit down at the blackjack table and you played a hand for $1, she was able to count the cards. It just came naturally to her. And we always went to the same dealer, a fellow by name. It's amazing that I remember these things, but by the name of Bob Butler. And Bob was a very gregarious type fella. And I would stand behind Carolyn because I felt you don't build these beautiful casinos with people beating them, that's for sure. And I didn't want to be thought of as a young lawyer as a sucker. And we became friendly just through the Hacienda and the card game there. And then one day I got a phone call I didn't get the phone call, but a phone call came into the pit at the Hacienda. And the fellow on the long distance line, who's the best criminal lawyer in Las Vegas? And nothing's changed in all these years. The pit boss cupped the phone and he said, who's the best criminal lawyer in Las Vegas? So Bob Butler said, I don't know whether he does any criminal work. He did a bankruptcy for me. And tell him Oscar Goodman. So Oscar Goodman's the best criminal defense lawyer in Las Vegas. So I get a phone call from this gruff voice, and it turns out the person who was calling me was Bob Martin, who was the leading odds maker in the United States for sports betting. I mean, recognized throughout the world. And he says, come over to such and such an address. It was near 15th and St. Louis. He says, we want to hire you on a case. And I, being a coward, said to Carolyn, would you drive me over there? And she sat out in the car, and I went up to the door, and he handed me an envelope. You better win the case. And I took the envelope and came outside. We drove around the corner. I said, sweetheart, let me see what's in the envelope. And I opened it up, and there were $3,100 bills. And I had never seen so much money at one time in my life. And I said, I better win the case. But it was a case he couldn't win. The brother of this alleged reputed mobster from the East Coast,
Mel Horowitz. Right?
Mel Horowitz was his name. They called him the professor. He would always go around with a little Homburg hat, and very educated fella. His stepbrother had been arrested out here in a car which had been stolen back in the New England area. And he was found behind the wheel, and all the government had to prove for a Dyer Act, that's what the crime was called, the Dyer Act conviction was that very thing, that a car was stolen in one state, transported to another, and it was virtually a given that the person who was behind the wheel was found guilty. So my office was just about a block and a half from here at the time, and I was scared to death because I had never tried a federal case. Didn't know how to pick a jury in federal court, didn't even know anything about the federal system, but you know, you had $3,000 in your pocket and you were told you better win the case, so you better do something right. And I got up the morning of the trial. When was that? Around Thanksgiving, wasn't it?
It was around
or Valentine's
Valentine's
Day, right?
yeah.
And came over to this building, and I got here about 6 o'clock in the morning, and I wanted to talk to the judge and tell him that this is a matter of law, and I want to waive a jury. I want this to be a bench trial because I didn't know how to pick a jury. And on the way up the steps, I saw the court clerk, and I said, Miss Fitzgerald, because I had seen her, and the whole federal bench, which consisted of really one active judge, and that was Roger Foley. They were so nice to me as a young lawyer. Just when I came over to argue motions, they had Carol Fitzgerald was the court clerk, and they had Press Blewett, who was the courtroom clerk, and Mr. Kempfer, who was the court stenographer. I remember it all like yesterday. And I said, could you please go and see the judge? This is a case that should be a bench trial. And she said, well, I don't think so, but I'll go in and see the judge. And Judge Foley was a very thoughtful fellow. And she came out about 5 minutes later. She said, sorry, Mr. Goodman, but you're going to have a jury trial. Well, with that, I walked down the steps. She walked into the building, and I vomited all. Well, don't laugh. I vomited all over the third step. Now, you'll be able to see it. It's not my vomit, but the third step in this building, on the right-hand side, when you're facing the building, next to the brass rail, there's a little step, and that's where I vomited. And I've been promised, if I do well tonight, that there will be a plaque there.
It's in the works.
That's what I was told by Jonathan Ullman, who's the boss over here. He said, I'll give you a bronze plaque. I said, no, I want a gold plaque right down at that spot. And cool. Came in, and basically in federal court, the judge does most of the questioning, at least in those days. The lawyers could ask 1 or 2 questions, but couldn't go into length, particularly for a Dyer Act, which everybody figured would be a very quick trial and be a very quick guilty verdict. And I tried the case the best I could, and the judge actually instructed the jury that very same day, and he said, I want counsel to be able to come back here within 10 minutes from the time we give you a call that the jury's returned a verdict, and since they probably won't return a verdict until tomorrow, when we call you, we expect you to be waiting to get the verdict. We want to make sure that the jury isn't waiting. So we're walking back. I'm with my client who's out at liberty, out on bond, and the reputed mobster brother. And the reputed mobster brother says, Mr. Goodman. I said, no, it's Oscar. He said, well, Mr. Goodman, he says, do you think, is it better if we have a quick verdict or they take a long time? I said, miss, I said, that's not even close. The longer they take, the better off we're going to be. And walk into my office, and the phone's ringing, and the secretary says, they have a verdict. I said, I told you that the shorter they stayed out, the better off we would be. And we came back here, and I could try that case 1,000 times. After trying every single case that I tried in my life, I could try that case 1,000 times. I never would win it. The jury comes back with a not guilty. And that's interesting. You'll see with the clients when I talk about them, if we go through a chronology, they talk to each other, particularly reputed mobsters. They all know each other's business, particularly those who are involved in bookmaking because they share a common bond in sports betting. And the word went out that Mel's brother was found not guilty in Las Vegas, and some people apparently tucked it in the back of their mind. And that's how my career really started.
And the next step that really catapulted you was, and let me set the stage, so the Omnibus Crime Bill of 1968 it really opened the door for wiretapping again, legal wiretapping. One of the first people to get caught was, I might mispronounce this,
John. I never heard this. I better start asking the questions.
John DePasquale.
He was a bartender over at the Gold Nugget.
Yeah.
And he was providing line information from Las Vegas to people around the country who were bookmakers. And there was a father and son team. The Sklarov men, Marty and his father Jesse, who were using the phones at the Miami International Airport. And John would call in the line to them, and they would disseminate it to bookmakers in that area, and the government had put on a wiretap. Up until that time, wiretapping was forbidden. It was illegal. It was a violation of the Fourth Amendment. It invaded people's privacy, but then a case was decided which said that since it did not involve a physical intrusion, it was all right to wiretap if there was probable cause, and a judge passed upon the probable cause. And John was picked up giving this information, and John was arrested along with some very prominent bookmakers down there in Miami. And he said, "Would you go down to Miami and defend me?" And I said, "I would love to," and went down to Miami. And the Scleros had excellent attorneys who were representing them. One of them was E. David Rosen, who was the attorney for Meyer, Lansky, and held in great esteem by the bar, both in the Florida area as well as around the country. And he took me under his wing when I was down there, took me to his home, introduced me to his family. He was really nice to me. And every day I would move for a severance. Now that's a motion where you ask the judge to allow your client to be tried separately from the other defendants in the case. And usually it's based on a weighing of the evidence, and they had very little against Di Pasquale, and every day the judge would say, "Denied." I've heard more denieds in my career than I think any lawyer in the country. And then one day he says, "You can go home." I'm looking around. He said, "You can take your client home, Mr. Goodman. I'm granting your motion for severance." Wow. I said to John, "Well, let's go." And while I'm leaving, Mr. Rosen grabs me nicely, and he said, "How would you like to stay here and help us with the research on the case? This is a whole new area of the law." And I said, "What a privilege that would be." And John got on the plane and came back and went to work once again over at the Golden Nugget. And I stayed down there, and I learned so very, very much. And all of their clients were found guilty. And then shortly thereafter, the judge entered an order dismissing the case, finding my client not guilty in effect. And the word went out amongst these folks. Oscar Goodman won the first wiretap case in the country. Had nothing at all to do with the wiretap. Zero. And basically, it was from that case that my career really began to blossom, because I got known as the first lawyer in the country to win a wiretap case.
There was another individual named Elliot Paul Price.
Elliot was a host at various hotels here in Las Vegas. He was a host at Caesars. And
He got caught up in a bookmaking.
a lot of people did in Las Vegas. The race and sports books in Las Vegas were not the beautiful race and sports books that we see today, the kind that they had over at the Stardust or they have across the street at Circa. They were storefront race and sports books, and Elliot frequented them. And there was a raid that took place, and the sheriff took his work card as part of the raid, even though it was a federal raid, and nobody had ever challenged the work card laws. In order to work in the casino industry, you had to have a work card. It had to be issued by the sheriff. And Elliot came to me. He said, "I hear that you know what you're doing." I said, "Well, I do my best." And I was able to win the first case involving the Gaming Control Board and got him his work card back. And other people who were indicted as a result of that raid included Frank Rosenthal. He was amongst them. And a lot of folks who were known as very, very astute bookmakers and gamblers. And when they were arrested on or at least searched on a giant simultaneous search that took place on December the 12th of 1970, Rosenthal was one of them, and he hired me, and I was hired in, there were 19 different cities where people whose last name ended in vowels, out of 26 cities that had been searched, where I was hired because I was the supposed wiretap expert. And as I said, it was the first case, and it was a sort of a feather in my cap. And I'm not the neatest guy in the world. I had 19 files on my floor, and they were all spread out. If I had one file on my floor, I would have mastered the file, but here I was hopping from file to file and case to case. Cases were all over the United States, Macon, Georgia, Greenville, South Carolina, Miami, New York, Philly, San Francisco, all over. And one of my clients from one of those cities was in my office. He said, "Oscar, look at this." I said, "Please, don't bother me. I'm working. I'm studying. I'm trying to get this case under control, and your case is part of it." He said, "No, you got to look at this." I said, "No, don't bother me." So he was aggravating, and he was aggravating me anyhow. And I said, what do you want me to see? The only way a wiretap could be authorized, and you couldn't have one without the Attorney General of the United States or one of his 9 assistant attorney generals. That's not like a local guy. That's big. You have an assistant attorney general in charge of the Civil Rights Division, in charge of the Criminal Division. The Criminal Division attorney general is a fellow by the name of Will Wilson, and Will Wilson's signature was on all of these authorization requests. And he said, "Look at this." I said, "Will Wilson." And he said, "Look at this." It had Will Wilson on it, another file. And then he said, "Look at that." And then Will Wilson, and even a separate signature. And I said, "Wait a second. Will Wilson changed his signature each time he signed one of these things?" And I said, I have to get to the bottom of this. So I subpoenaed John N. Mitchell, the United States Attorney for the United States, a rotten son of a gun. The only good thing about him, he had a wife who was worse than he. She aggravated this guy to death. These were 2 misanthropes. They got up in the morning, they hated each other. He was punished at home, so he took it out on everybody else. And he was a pompous guy. He sat in my office like I'm sitting. I'm not pompous. He had a corncob pipe, and he was aggravated that I was able to get him into my office, and I had to fight to get him there because he fought not to have his deposition taken. And he finally conceded that these were all signed not by Will Wilson, but by various ministerial people in the Justice Department. And I moved to have all these cases dismissed on the violation of the statute. And because the statute was explicit in its terms, I won all 19 motions. So at that point in time, I was the mob attorney. I mean, wherever I was, there's a mob attorney. And it had certain benefits, very little detriment. I ate at the best restaurants, and they treated me very well, got me tickets to World Series games and 50-yard line tickets. So it was great representing all these fellas. And I just say fellas because none of the defendants in the case were women, even though, I do believe in rights for women, but they weren't involved in bookmaking really at the time. And winning all these cases was what really started me. And then one day, I get a phone call from Dave Rosen. Now, we all remember who Dave Rosen was. He was the attorney in the first wiretap case that asked me to stay down in Miami. And he said, "Oscar, how would you like to be a local counsel for me in Las Vegas?" I said, "Anything for you, Dave." He said, "Well, I represent Meyer Lansky." And Meyer Lansky, if you don't know, then you shouldn't be here.
That's fair.
Meyer Lansky was the financial genius of all of organized crime throughout the United States, and Lucky Luciano's partner, and the money man supposedly behind all the hotels here at the time. And I said, what a privilege that would be. He said, "Well, I need a local counsel, and if you would do that, I would really appreciate it." And I said, "I really appreciate you." He said, "What do you need as your fee?" And I said, well, I quoted a fee, and he said, "That won't be any problem for Mr. Lansky." And next day I get a phone call, and Mr. Lansky spoke with a very heavy Eastern European Jewish accent. That's the only way I could put it, and he said, I hear nice things about you, and he said, take good care of me. And I said, I'll do anything for you because you're Mr. Rosen's client. And, but Dave said he's ill, and he really shouldn't travel, and he shouldn't go to trial. So the other defendants in the case were Morris Landsberg and Sam Cohen, and then two local fellas who worked here in Las Vegas, whose names are maybe prominent to you. I don't rather not mention.
Just to be clear, there were 6 people total. I'm sorry, 7 people total. But Steve Delmont.
Well, then you're giving them up. So
Jerry Gordon.
If you're giving them up, Steve Delmont,
Harry
and
Goldberg,
Gordon.
Sam Ziegman, Morris Landsberg.
Well,
Sam
actually, it was Gordon and Delmont, as well as Cohen and Landsberg and Lansky. And Cohen and Landsberg were represented by the finest attorneys in the country. Edward Bennett Williams had one, and Bill Hundley, who was Robert Kennedy's right-hand man, had another. And I was sort of a tag-along Tulu, but they fought very, very hard for their client, and every time the case was going to come to trial, I came waltzing into this very courtroom, and Judge Foley would sit up there, and I would ask the judge, Your Honor, this wasn't here, but may I approach the bench? He said, come on up, Mr. Goodman. He was very kind to me. And I went up and I said, yeah, these are medical records which show that Mr. Lansky is infirm and won't be able to really withstand the rigors of trial. So he would continue the case. And then the government's pulling their hair out because they really wanted him, and they wanted Landsberg and Cohen because they were rich. And finally came the time, and they said, well, we'll go to trial, and Lansky will take him to trial later. And I submitted more medical records, and then they came with records to having photographs of Meyer Lansky walking his little, and I have trouble with this word. I thought he was walking a poodle all these years, but somebody told me it was a shih tzu. And, but I kept on calling it a poodle, down at 21st and Collins on Miami Beach. And he's not sick. Look at him in the jiu-jitsu. And the judge said, well, I find him to be ill, and I'm going to sever him from the case. And the others all went to trial. All were found guilty. And then Judge Foley dismissed the case against Meyer Lansky, and that was it. The whole reputed mobster world said, this guy from Las Vegas, I was relatively young at the time, wasn't I?
I would think so.
I thought so. Represented Meyer Lansky and beat his case in Las Vegas. And from that point on, anytime anybody who was associated with, quote, organized crime, end quote, would call me. And I was building up a phenomenal clientele who appreciated what I was a hardworking lawyer who appreciated the fact that I worked hard and I was getting real results, not because of anything that I did, but because I was a lucky lawyer and winning these cases, getting them dismissed. And it really was from that I developed the reputation as being a mob lawyer.
A couple of things about, just to
Wait a second,
follow
I have to drink.
Yes, have a drink. A couple of things about.
Wait, I have to drink.
All right. Well, they can't think and drink.
I can't drink and think.
There you go. A couple of things about, to follow up on this Lansky case. The first thing is, was Judge Roger D. Foley, he's the son who handled the case, and in 1974, he's the one who said that Lansky was too ill to stand trial. He took a lot of heat for that.
Oh, my God. They said he was on the fix.
Yeah.
This is a very different time than it is today, really. I practiced here and during that period of time, that it was just a sliver of what it is today. It's a whole different world. It was just a world that will never be replicated. And I was involved in every single case. I had the first RICO case in the United States down in Macon, Georgia. And I had all these cases, and it was a wonderful experience because I was making law, and it was intellectually challenging. It was tough because most of my cases were not in Las Vegas. I would leave the house on Sunday and fly to a different city, stay in a hotel, do my work, and then we'd come home. After a while, judges said that it was okay for me to leave on a Friday afternoon so I could come home to my family. I asked them to do that. And Carol would pick me up at the airport, and we would go to the old bootlegger, which used to be on Eastern and near Tropicana. Very, very good pizza. It was like a honeymoon because we really enjoyed that Friday night going out. And then Saturday morning, I wake up very, very early because I was on Eastern time or some time other than Pacific time, and went down to my law office and wrote out little Post-its of things that had to be done during the week, and then come home and go to the kids' soccer games and violin recitals and that kind of thing. And then on Saturday night, take the children out to dinner, and Sunday they'd take me to the airport again, and I would fly away. So it was a rough way to go, and a lot of sacrifice on I missed it because I missed all these wonderful times with my children, but my wife, being a wonderful mother, she raised them beautifully, and they didn't miss me, and they all turned out to, they didn't know the difference. And then they all turned out to be wonderful young people, and now they're not young anymore, they're middle-aged, and they're all doing very well. The oldest is an oncologist, a comprehensive cancer. He's a research guy and as well as a clinician, specializing in prostate cancer. And the middle one went to law school, did very, very well, and went into the Marine Corps and retired as a major, and then came out as a beautiful practice here. The youngest one was a juvenile delinquent. And my daughter, she worked at UMC in the Burn Center, and she's a wonderful young lady. And then the guy who was a juvenile delinquent, this guy would have been the greatest criminal of all time. He never went to class. He's not in any yearbook. Never got a Social Security card. No one has his fingerprint. And now he's a judge here.
Naturally. So time flies. I want to go right to the heart of this thing, which is
one thing. What are we doing?
Tony Spilotro.
Yes.
Tony Spilotro. Probably at least your first or second most famous client. Tell us about how you met him and how you got involved with his cases.
Well, basically, I met him two ways, almost at the same time. I met him through Frank Rosenthal because Frank Rosenthal. Tony was arrested for murder back in Chicago and insisted that Rosenthal would be a character witness for him, and Rosenthal didn't want to because Rosenthal came out here and didn't have what's called heat on him or a jacket on him. Basically, they were letting him alone, and he was doing what he wanted to do, and that it was to rise in the casino industry. And that's when I first met Tony, and I met him about the same time when he had purchased or leased the gift shop at Circus Circus. And the gaming people came to Jay Sarno, who owned Circus Circus, and in my opinion was the founding father of architecture as we know it in Las Vegas. He designed Caesars and Circus, and the two of them had a decent relationship, and they told Sarno that unless he gets rid of Spilotro, then they're going to go after his license. So he came to me, Sarno did, and he said, "What should I do?" And I said, "Well, they're going to take your license unless you do what they say, because they get away with whatever they want to do." And he said, "Can you stop them?" I said, "I could try." And Tony said, "No, forget about it." He says, "Negotiate a price between us." So he had purchased the lease for $70,000, and I got him $700,000 from Sarno, and then ended up representing Sarno later on because he felt I did such a good job negotiating for Tony.
So we can't do everything, but I'm related to Tony, but I want to ask you about Frank Bluestein. And let me explain.
Herbie Blitzstein.
No, Frank Bluestein.
Oh, Frank Bluestein.
So in 1980, Metro Police Intelligence Detective Gene Smith shot and killed a man named Frank Bluestein.
Jeff,
Yes.
that's an oxymoron. Metro Police Intelligence?
Oh, okay. That was the department he was working in. And Bluestein was a Hacienda Hotel maitre d' and an associate or friend of Tony's. So a coroner's inquest determined the shooting was justified,
baloney.
but it nonetheless caused quite an uproar. You were part of that uproar, I think.
Yes.
And the Bluestein family subsequently filed a civil rights lawsuit against Sheriff John McCarthy and Metro and the detectives. That civil trial commenced several years later in 1987. And the reason I bring all this up, because you actually testified, you were actually on the stand in that case talking about the police harassment. Do you remember that?
I never forget it because I believe that the police here were, and I don't use the word Nazi loosely, but they were using Nazi-type tactics. They actually, they were idiots. The FBI and the police were idiots. They actually had a book called a watch book, and I gave the museum a copy of the watch book, which was given to me by one of the Metro cops. When he passed away, he gave it to his daughter, say, give it to Oscar, he may want to give it to the Mob Museum. It showed what these clowns were doing. They followed primarily Spilotro, and then anybody who was tangentially involved with him every single minute of every single day. They followed politicians, they followed Spilotro's associates, they followed me, they followed everybody at their whim, and they were arbitrary, and they had to make a note at the end of each day as to who they were following and what they were doing. It was outrageous, and I found out that they really had no idea. There's one entry in there, Oscar went to the airport, and then another, and I don't use foul language around women, another, Oscar came home, and then it said, and Oscar's pissed off. So they were right, I was. I had a running battle with them, and what was the question?
It was just about that. It was about Bluestein. You testified about this.
I lose track of things.
Because you thought Bluestein was being harassed.
There's no question he was being harassed. He didn't do anything. He was coming home from work, and these two cops, I still remember Gene Smith, he was a lying cop. They killed him. They assassinated him. And then they said he had a gun. They had a throwaway. He didn't do anything. He wasn't that kind of guy. He was a hardworking stiff who was a bellboy or something over at the Hacienda. Had nothing to do with Spilotro. Now, Steve Bluestein, his father, was a close friend of Tony's. Steve was involved with the culinary union. But as far as the young man who was shot dead for no reason at all, it was shameful. And you know, what bothers me more than anything, when these cops, and it's changed a little bit over the year, obviously violate the law, the least he could do is give them a good reprimand or put a note in their file. They didn't do any of these things. They just let them go on their merry way. And I had other experiences with Smith and Groover, and I became friends with Groover over the years, but I believe it was Smith that did the shooting. It was just a cold-blooded shooting.
Let's be clear that the coroner's jury did determine that it was justified.
Well, there's never been one.
They won Metro won the civil case. I just want to put that.
That's an asterisk because they've never lost one in front of the coroner's inquest. Metro has never been found guilty in all the years that I've lived here, where there's been an accusation against a policeman for misconduct, which resulted in some kind of a death. Never one. And now that's nonsense. But that's the way the town was set up to protect certain people, and others got beat up. And that's why I like doing what I did, because I was the only bastion, and I'm not saying this braggingly, one of the few guys anyhow who stood between these citizens of the United States who are being abused by law enforcement people. And to me, that was intolerable. And that's why I always liked being what I was. I never had a problem sleeping at night. I felt I was doing the Lord's work to make sure that the Constitution was being followed and that law enforcement and the power people weren't taking advantage of people. People said, how can you represent all these bad people? Well, I heard that Tony Spilotro killed 27 people 1,000 times, most of the time from FBI agents. And I said, shame on you. He's never spent a day in jail.
I want to talk about one of those cases. So 1983, Spilotro was indicted for the 1962 murders of two men, Billy McCarthy and Jimmy Miraglia.
That was
These
the
were
M&M murder.
known as the M&M murders. This one is somewhat depicted in the movie Casino in a different context. But the trial is held in Chicago. So
Yes.
you actually were in Chicago trying this case.
Right.
The fresh evidence, essentially, that the prosecution had was the testimony of Frank
A
Collada
lying,
about this.
lying rat.
You mentioned earlier about how you wanted the judge to rule in this Dyer Act case, remember? And then
Yes.
there was a jury trial.
Right.
In this particular case, it became the judge was the...
They waived the jury.
that was kind of unusual, though.
Very unusual. Herb Barcy was my co-counsel, and he was from Chicago and very well respected in the Chicago bar. And he said, this judge really will not like Collada. And Collada was the only real witness against Spilotro at the time. And he said, why take a chance with the jury? They may believe this guy. We feel you should waive the jury. And Tony said, well, you know, Herb knows the town. You don't know it, Oscar. And I said, I don't like waiving a jury because to me, juries are the most wonderful thing that this country has to offer in the criminal justice system. But they insisted on it, and I thought we were dead ducks. We did a great job in destroying Collada on the witness stand, but I thought we were dead ducks. And then the judge came in and he found Tony not guilty.
Yeah, insufficient evidence, couldn't prove their case.
They couldn't prove the case.
Now, there is an asterisk on this one, though.
There is.
Because Judge Thomas Maloney later, not in this case, but in other cases, was found to be a corrupt judge.
Apparently, he was taking bribes from people, but nobody ever investigated Barcy, the Chicago attorney, for participating in any kind of bribery by this judge. And look, if they thought that he had done something like that, they would have gone to Barcy or to Tony and made a sweetheart deal. If they would give him they didn't even bother thinking that they would have anything to do to corrupt the judge.
I wanted one more case regarding Spilotro. So there was the Hole in the Wall gang trial, and the first trial was a mistrial because of issues with the jurors. Do you remember that?
Is that the one where the jurors said they overheard somebody in the hallway talking about $10,000? Well,
Right.
Was Tony sitting next to me when I was trying the case?
I think so.
I think so too. And
But the point where I'm going with this is the second trial was scheduled for June 16th, 1986.
right.
2 days before when that's scheduled to start, that's when Tony and Michael go missing.
Yes.
Tony and Michael Spilotro.
Yes.
You remember that scenario?
Oh, yeah, it was, nobody was closer to Tony Spilotro other than his family, of course, and myself, because we spent so much time together fighting black book cases and in trial and traveling, and Tony would always get the room next to me, and he would wake me up about 5 in the morning because he was lonely. He wanted somebody to drink coffee with him, and I wanted to sleep, but he would make noise, so he would wake me up and come into my room with a cup of coffee for me, thinking I would forgive him. I never forgave him for it, and I've never forgotten it. And I didn't even know he was leaving town, and I get a phone call from Nancy, his wife, and said, I haven't heard from Tony in 2 or 3 days. You know where he is? I said, well, I think he may have gone back to Chicago, but I have no reason, to have talked to him about it. We had nothing going in Chicago at the time, and then shortly thereafter, his body and that of his brother Michael were found in a cornfield in Indiana where he had been found by a farmer or a rancher or somebody back there. And the movie Casino had it wrong. They had him being beaten to death in a field in Indiana, when in fact it turned out upon further investigation that it was in a basement of a home in the Chicago area, and then the bodies were transferred to that cornfield and they're buried there.
The interesting thing about that, a lot of things that are tragic and emotional about it, but you managed to keep Tony out of jail for more than 10 years.
It was
but
remarkable.
he was done in by his own, his own people.
Yeah, it was interesting though. Nobody in law enforcement tried to find out who killed him. They were happy to be. It was the saddest thing. I thought nobody came to me. I wouldn't have talked to them if they did, but they didn't come to me and say, "Do you have any idea who killed him?" Nobody I knew out here was asked a question by the FBI or by Metro. Do you know who may have killed him? Nobody. It was as though they were happy to be rid of him, and it all happened as a result of his brother Pat, who was a dentist, a very prominent dentist in the Chicago area, actually going out and ferreting out the potential murderers of him and ending up being a witness against a group of people who were found guilty of killing him. But I went to his funeral, and apparently the Catholic Church did not want him buried in a Catholic cemetery, but they were able to find a prominent priest who arranged to have him buried in a cemetery. And I missed him because I spent so much time with him. It was a real void that was created in my life. I didn't realize how much time I was spending representing him on black book cases, murder cases, racketeering cases, and then when he was out of my life, it left a big, big space.
Now, the other client that people identify you with is Frank Rosenthal, and you did a lot of different things with him, a lot of black book case, different licensing cases. What do you remember about the sort of famous Gaming Commission hearing that's recreated in Casino?
I remember that it was a lie. It was a lie that Harry Reid had told Phil Hannafin, who was with the Gaming Control Board. Hannafin apparently asked Harry to give Rosenthal a fair hearing because all of the gaming people were looking at it, and he told Rosenthal if Rosenthal went forward with the hearing, and it would be a fair hearing. Well, it turns out it wasn't a fair hearing, and I had a bitter falling out with Reid at that point in time. Up to that point in time, we were friendly. We took the bar within a year of each other, and I had just gotten a mistrial in a case in Kanab, Utah, of all places, and was coming home, and I get a phone call that Carolyn's father was being honored as the president of the New York Medical Society, and I figured I would surprise her because she had gone back to the swearing in, and I turned around and went to Macy's, I believe, and in New York, got myself a tux and nice shoes and everything, and showed up at the ceremony, and she was delighted to see me, and she said, "You got to go home." I said, "Why do I have to go home? I just got here." She said, "Sal's son was kidnapped." I had represented Sal Saig, who was the owner of the Carpet Barn, which used to be where the Ironworks is, Artistic Ironworks on Charleston. The little boy was 8 years old, and he was taken from the playground at Temple Beth Shalom, which was at 17th or 16th and Oki, and they asked me whether I would help in trying to find out where the boy was, and it was a strange bedfellow situation because they had me sleep in Sal's home in case something came up about the kidnapping, and the other people who were sleeping in the same bedroom, it was remarkable really, were two FBI agents and a Metro guy. And it was, as I say, strange bedfellows, but we became very close with one another. And unfortunately, they never found the little fella. And I know who did it. He went to trial and was found guilty. His attorney was the world's worst attorney, and I think that the jury must have felt sorry for the attorney, because this guy was a horrible attorney. And I think the fellow who did it may still be around, believe it or not, but they never found the little boy. And all the father wanted to do was find him and have closure, but it never came.
The car bombing. So
Frank's?
the car bombing in Frank, 1982.
Yeah, that took place at Tony Roma's, although some of the books say it was at Marie Callender's. But
Right in between, a parking lot between the two.
yeah, and Tony was with Marty Caine and Joey Boston, and they had just finished coming out from dinner. And the Cadillac that Frank was driving, there was a defect in it. And on the floor, the Cadillac, I guess GM, put like a steel sheet. So when Frank opened up the door and the car exploded, it was a horrible explosion. I think that was around, 15th and Sahara, around there?
Well, 6th and Sahara.
6th and Sahara. Well,
yeah.
a mile from there, they actually found pieces of the car.
Yeah.
That's what kind of an explosion was. And Rosenthal was on the gurney, and he called me over. He was badly burned, and he said, I know who did it, but I'm not going to tell anybody, so don't you venture any guesses who may have done something. I said, I don't say anything, Frank. Don't worry about it. And he recovered from it, but there were certain ways certain of these crime families did in people. Some of them used 22s, others used bombs, others used strangling, and it had the earmarks of some people that I thought may have taken this action against him. And basically, he was a marked man at the time, and from that point in, he went through some hearings and then finally left town.
Moved to Orange County first, and then
Yeah,
moved to
he
Florida.
had 2 children, beautiful kids. His daughter, believe it or not, was just missed being on the United States Olympic swim team. And, you ask, what do these people do? They're very interesting, the ones who are pointed as being the bad guys. Rosenthal would get up every morning about 4 o'clock and go out to the UNLV swimming pool and actually help his child in her swimming. It almost reminded me of Mike Agassi and Andre. Mike was always teaching Andre how to play tennis until he became the greatest tennis player in the world. And she just missed the Olympic team by that much, and he left town. He went to Mission Viejo, and she swam down there and then finally moved to Boca Raton. I had a case in Palm Springs, or Palm Beach, which is the one in Florida. Palm Beach?
Yeah.
I had a case in Palm Beach. I was representing Natalia Rakicki. And one night I drove up to Boca Raton, and Rosenthal had it's interesting, he had a place called Crocs. It was just like the Stardust. He had the pretty girls there, and he was on the phone with his bets, and he was living life to the hilt. And we shared some old stories, and that's the last I saw of him.
Yeah. Now, sadly, just a month after the car bombing, that's when Jerry Rosenthal died as well.
Yeah, that was, I really didn't find out a lot of the things that I ultimately found out until I watched the movie Casino. Had I known what I was doing, I would be even richer than I am. I'd own a couple of islands in the Caribbean. I'd have more planes than Sheldon Adelson. But Jerry, I never saw her taking drugs and all the things they said about her. I saw her under the influence, no question about that, of alcohol. But I never saw her being abusive. And then one day I found out that she was found in California. Apparently the autopsy said that she died of a drug overdose, and that was the end of them. But I never knew, and I say this on my oath, that she and Tony Spilotro had some type of romantic relationship. Never saw it, wouldn't have dreamt in a million years that took place. Because I was a need-to-know lawyer. I was so busy, I didn't want to find out about anybody's life. I wasn't interested in other people's lives. I was trying to keep them out of prison or out of the electric chair. I really didn't care whether they had a fight at home or something like that. That wasn't my style. I just wanted to do my work, but that whole story just shocked me, to be honest.
And I want to just mention, before we open it up to questions, and I want to do that in just a couple of minutes, I want to fast forward to one of the, not the last, but one of the latter cases in your career, and that's Mike Tyson.
Yes.
The boxer Mike Tyson. So you all remember June 28th, 1997, Tyson is he's fighting Evander Holyfield here, and he bites off a piece of Evander Holyfield's ear.
Although no one saw him bite it off, they just saw him spit it out.
So he's facing a lifetime, potentially a lifetime ban from boxing, and he hires you to help him with this. How
Correct.
did that, what happened?
Well, actually, it sounds like it was a terrible result, but it was a great result. I was friendly with Elias Ghanem, who was on the boxing commission or athletic commission, and
Doctor?
the doctor he was a very prominent doctor here in town, and he called me into his office over in the building where they were having the hearing. I had been hired by Don King to represent Tyson. I did not have Tyson in the hearing at the time, and they said, you know, we already have seized $3 million out of his purse, and if we suspend him, it could be for an indefinite period of time. I said, what's my alternative? Because, you know, the proofs were there, and they said, why don't you do this? And they told me something that I really, that's a nice thing about having this kind of practice. You learn something new every day. They said if he takes a revocation, at the end of the year he could come back and he could reapply. Well, I knew that Tyson was a virtual money machine for Las Vegas. When he had a fight, the people came in from all over the world. The hotels did well, and there was a big feather in our cap. So I talked to Don. I said, would he take the revocation? He took the revocation, and after a year I was right. He came back in and right away applied and got relicensed.
I'd like to open this up for questions. We want to be sure to leave, as
It's
I
so
mentioned.
fast. How much time have we
Well,
done?
it's been an hour.
No.
Yeah,
No.
yeah. Want to open
I'm
up for
having a
questions
good time.
because there was so many things you guys want to ask about, I'm sure, that aren't on in my notes. So we need to use a microphone. So we're going to pick you, and then the microphone will come to you. So if you could raise your hand. Okay, go ahead in the front.
Oscar, I was wondering if you ever represented or worked with Nick Tano.
With whom?
Nick Tano?
Nick Hannum?
Dick Tanum?
Yeah.
Dick Tano, the private detective?
No, Nick Tano that used to be...
Dick Tano, I did not work with him, but his good friend was Joe Augusto, who was a client of the office, and Nick was involved with the Tropicana, and they were being investigated for skim out of the Tropicana, and so I knew him and his wife Janice, but it was really Augusto who was the fella. I thought he was a clown, to be honest with you. To me, he looked like an idiot. He used to go around with a little hat on his head, and he spoke with this very heavy Italian accent, and he was telling everybody that he was born in the United States, and that he came from Yelm, Washington. Well, half of it was true. He was born over in Italy and then brought here and lived in Yelm for a while, and then raised in Italy. And he turned out, he was not a clown. He turned out to be the guy who was in charge of the skim on behalf of the Kansas City mob, and actually was very close to fellas like Nick Sevilla, who was the head of the Kansas City outfit and a very good client of mine. And when we were trying Nick's case, in the middle of the case, Augusto, who was a co-defendant, he flipped and became an informant, and they said that he had a heart attack, and I'm convinced he's still alive in the witness protection someplace, because there's nothing wrong with his health, that's for sure.
Hi. This is not a question, but a memory. I met you 27 or 28 years ago.
You're not that old.
Thank you. Neither are you.
I wish.
You had given my son-in-law an award for Employee of the Year or Marshal of the Year because he had the most domestic arrests for that year as a marshal
With the city?
with the city.
Yes.
And you had given
Was I the mayor at the time?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you were.
And what's your boy's name?
Brian Wakowiak.
Okay.
I'm sure you don't remember.
You're
him.
wrong. I don't forget anything. That's what the gin does.
Do you really? Well, I just wanted to tell you that I was very honored to meet you, and I'm very honored to be here tonight. And you were just so gracious and so wonderful. You wrote me a note on the program, and you signed your name, and I still have it to this day, and it's framed, and it's hanging on my wall.
Oh, that's very nice of you. I appreciate it. Look, I really love being the mayor more than any other reason because I can make people smile. As a criminal defense lawyer with my clientele, I was always being followed, I was always being overheard, and I really didn't have a life of my own. I was always a suspect in one thing or another. And then when I became the mayor, as a matter of fact, I was asked by the United States Conference of Mayors to lecture to all the newly elected mayors. And they sent me up to Harvard, to the government school, and I lectured them on how not to be indicted. And, the main thing was to keep the door open and make sure that nobody could frame you and say that you did something which you never did. And I would go into the supermarkets and shake hands, and I really felt like I was free once I was the mayor. And I've loved I love being the lawyer, I love being the mayor, and now I love being the husband of the mayor, and that's coming to a screeching halt, unfortunately. And I don't know what my wife's going to do other than clean the house, she says, but she tried that before, and that lasted 2 times, and that was the end of it.
Go ahead.
So I wanted to ask, Oscar, what motivated you to run for mayor? I took my mom many years ago to one of your epic martinis with the mayor. And she's from Ohio, and it was one of her most epic memories of being out here. And we all loved you as mayor, and I just wanted to know what was your motivation to run?
Well, I had, to be quite frank, I had tried every kind of case imaginable, as you hear. These are just a sprinkling of them, and this town's been so good to me, and I know it sounds like a cliche, but I mean everything that I say. I love Las Vegas. It's provided my wife and myself with the most wonderful of experiences, and we never would have had our family but for being in Las Vegas and the practice that I was able to develop. It couldn't have happened anyplace else. I just wasn't liking myself after a while, and because all I went down to the office for was to see how much I could charge, and I always made money, but that wasn't what I was about. And we were on a cruise in the Caribbean, and I said to the family, I said, I want a family meeting, because whenever we had a decision that was important to one another, we would all meet and everybody put in their 2 cents. And Carolyn abstained, and the 4 children, they voted 3-0 against them when I told them I'd like to run for mayor. They said, Dad, there's no way you can win. You have more baggage than the Sky Caps out at McCarran. I said, well, if I'm running, I'm winning. I mean, I don't know how to go and lose. And I don't like polls. I think they're a waste of time. My poll was going into Costco. And if somebody smiled at me or shook my hand, I knew I had their vote. And I felt I was going to win, although the bookmakers, they didn't do it here. But in London, I was a 17-1 underdog. And now you gave me a great opening here, because I hate the RJ. I cannot stand the RJ. And I mean, I really hate the RJ. Their editorial, the Sunday after I filed, I picked up the stinking RJ and took it to our little dinette area and opened up, and the editorial was anybody but Oscar for mayor. And I said, boy, that's a heck of a thing. They don't know anything about me. And then it got a little better because the San Francisco Chronicle, and I don't know what their business was, they said Las Vegas should not elect the barrister to butchers. I don't know where that came from. I mean, what does San Francisco have? They have a bridge? And you can't even see that with all the fog and smog and all that nonsense up there. So,
I've been thinking about this, though. You've mentioned this a couple times to me in the last while about this RJ editorial, which I remember very clearly. And I almost think that might have been the best thing that could have happened to you.
I think so. I ran 3 times for mayor, and each time they always backed the other candidate. I said, thank God. I did, but I think I got even with them. They have a contest, the best of this, the worst of that. They call it something else. And,
Best of Las Vegas. Yeah.
okay, and after I get through my first year, the best of Las Vegas comes out, and my secretary said, Mr. Goodman, RJ called, they're having this big party at one of the hotels, and they're announcing the best and the worst. I said, well, I don't think I should go. I don't want to be called the worst. And she said, well, I think you should go. It's the right thing to do. So I got myself a nice suit and sat by myself and had my martini, and I saw these big shots in the room there. And I don't think there is such a thing as a big shot, but I saw all these people in the room, and they announced, and the best politician, Oscar Goodman. Well, it knocked me off I took another sip of my gin. I walked up and I said, today I feel like I'm the luckiest man in the happiest man in the world, the happiest man in the universe. And that stuck. That's what they always said. He calls himself the happiest man in the universe. I said, but there's only one bad thing. When I was first elected, I had 2 little doggies at home. And now I only have one, and I don't know what to do with the other half of the paper.
Okay. Do you have any, Oscar, do you have any last words for our audience?
Oh, they're not paying us away, are they? Yeah, I do. I'm a little bit of a wise guy, but it's all done in good spirit and good humor, I hope. And I appreciate the fact that you're at this wonderful, wonderful facility. This is a very special thing. The Mob Museum is unique to the city of Las Vegas, is unique in the world. And it's only because of folks like you who have an interest in learning, who support it, who come to events like this, and the events are phenomenal, that it's able to exist. And the staff here is absolutely incredible. Jeff is marvelous. Jonathan Ullman, who's the director, is phenomenal. And they gave me a hard time on this one. Everybody was knocking me. How can you have a building that was just dedicated to Oscar Goodman and commemorating and honoring his clients? And I was getting heat from all over. And then finally I had the best idea I think I've ever had in my life. Ellen Knowlton, who was the retiring head of the FBI, was at a gathering, and I was there, and I went up to her and I said, Miss Knowlton, I know we've had our differences, but I've always had a great deal of respect for you. You can do me a favor. She said, why would I do you a favor? I said, I wouldn't do myself a favor if I were you, but I need a favor. Would you consider being the president of the board for our new Mob Museum? And she said, well, I'm not going to say no right away. I'll go back and I'll bring it up with the folks in D.C. in the Hoover building where the FBI was situated. And she came back, she said, I went to them and they said, they have no problem with it as long as you make it even-handed, as long as you give law enforcement an even shake, and that it's a fair fight as far as the history of organized crime in Las Vegas. And I said, I give you my word that it will be a fair display of the story of the mob and law enforcement in Las Vegas. And I think my word has been kept. And Ellen legitimized us virtually overnight, which is a wonderful thing. And I'm so happy that it's successful. I had one council member, and he, for some reason, denies it, although I have a million witnesses that he said it. He said, if the Mob Museum succeeds, he'll run around naked in the city of Las Vegas. And I said, well, I hope it fails then.
Well, Oscar, this has been wonderful. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And please, round of applause for Oscar.
Thank you. Thank you.